Hello and welcome to Hair in the Hawthorn. My name's Kate Ray and I'm your host. And in this mini-series that we've seen, I think 3 or 4 now, we've had apparitions, we've had glittering balls, we've had skyfish. I don't know, it kind of keeps on growing into the weird and bizarre, this mini-series. And today, my guest is no stranger to me. And I do know him from the fairy world, but the material fairy world. Met him many, many years ago. He is an artist who works in metal. And believe me, that doesn't even start to describe his absolutely beautiful, beautiful bits of artwork. And what we'll do is later on, we'll drop in the comments a link that you can go and find his work. But I totally say to you all, go and have a look. My next guest is James Ewing, and I'm sure you can find him on the internet just by typing in, I think is it James Ewing Workshop, the Ewing Workshop?
The Ewing Workshop.
The Ewing Workshop. Please go and have a look. It's mind-blowing stuff. It's not just metalwork, it's some kind of alchemy that occurs within his workshop. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce James and thank him very much for coming along and sitting and regaling his story. As usual, I don't know anything about it. I don't know where we're going to start. I don't know where this is going to go. So I'm super excited. James, hi. Thank you for coming and sitting and talking to me.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure.
So,
yes.
Where do you start?
Well, this is the first experience I had that opened my eyes to a wider world, a stranger world, definitely. I need to preface this. My mum and dad split up when I was 4 years old, and I ended up living with my dad. And several years after they split, my dad met a woman who was the stereotypical evil stepmother. She still is an horrendous human being, but so I spent most of my young life wishing that I could live with my mum, who I went to see once a fortnight in a little village where she lived. And I used to go to college in this little village where she lived. So as soon as I started going to secondary school, that two-weekly visit became an entire weekend, which was fantastic. And in this little village where she lived, there was a woman who all my school friends would tell stories about, that she was the spooky woman who lived in the cottage down the road. She was the witch. She was the one that boiled children and all that sort of stuff. Everybody knew her, and everybody sort of like pointed at her and spoke behind their hands as she walked past in the street. And I was visiting my mum one weekend, and on the Sunday I went out to play with some friends. And when I came home on the Sunday evening, who was sitting in my front room but the witch, talking to my mum? And so, of course, I didn't know what to do. This is a woman sitting here that I've heard all these stories about, and she's sitting there talking to my mum in my house. What do I do? But mum told me to come in, sit down, and she introduced me to this woman, and she was the nicest woman I've ever met in my life. And it was they told me about what it is she actually did, and she did live in this tiny little cottage in the middle of nowhere, and she grew her own herbs, and she mixed herbs and mixed up all sorts of different things, and she helped people. She was a medicine woman. And it was an amazing couple of hours in the company of this woman. She was such a, it just opened my eyes to a completely different world. And she kept saying to my mum that she could sense something about me, that she thought perhaps I had the ability to become what she was. And so she kept asking me questions, and I instead of a small boy sitting in a room with two adults, I felt part of the conversation, which was something new for me. Anyway, as the evening went on, this lady said to my mum, I'd like to take your son to my cottage and show him exactly what it is I do and see if he'd have any interest in that sort of thing. And so my mum trusted her implicitly, and we got in a car and off we went. And she showed me around this little cottage, and it was a fantastic little place, and she made me a cup of tea and we sat and we chatted. And as the conversation went on, I started talking about how much I wanted to live with my mum and how much I hated living with my stepmom and all that sort of stuff. And I just poured my heart out to this woman, and the tears came, and I was in roaring and grating, talking to her. And I was sitting there in her armchair in her front room, and she's sitting on the floor in front of me, listening to every word. I got tears rolling down my face. I looked up and I looked at her. And if you can imagine looking at someone's face, but then behind you, someone's got a projector and they're projecting an image of another face onto their face. But the face that's being projected is changing constantly. From a young man to an old woman to a young girl to a young boy, and it's just changing constantly. But all the time I can see her face. And I was in shock. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to think. The tears stopped, and I just sat there staring at this constantly changing face. And she looked at me. She said, "What's wrong?" And all I could think to do was, nothing. And she looked at me. She said, "You can see my face changing, can't you?" And she said it to me. She actually said, "You can see this happening, can't you?" And I said, yeah. And she said, "Yeah, I'm a shapeshifter. If you look at me long enough, I'll turn into a cat." And I didn't know what to do. Well, I was 11-year-old, and I'm sitting there watching this woman, and she just blasé, as if it was an everyday thing. "Yeah, if you stare at me long enough, I'll turn into a cat."
That's incredible.
And yeah. So that was my first experience that showed me there was a little bit more to our world than.
Did she not explain it any further than that? Did she not sort of elaborate on that at all, or was that all she said to you?
That was all she said to me.
And
I think perhaps she felt that she didn't need to explain it any further. As I say, because of some of the things she'd been saying to me and about me earlier that evening, I think perhaps she felt she didn't need to explain it to me any further.
And how did you feel? How did you feel at that point, and how did you feel after? Because it's obviously stayed with you.
Yeah, it's strange. I mean, I sat there and I saw this happening in front of me, and it was almost as if the entire 11 years of my life before that point meant nothing. Here I was thinking that the world is school, come home, wicked stepmother, go to school, come home, wicked stepmother. And all of a sudden I see this glimpse of a completely different world that in that instant I couldn't disagree with. It was real, it was tangible, it was there in front of me. And to see a completely different world that was far more inviting than the one it just like, yeah, all of that meant absolutely nothing. This is what the world can be.
I know a lot of people in the paranormal realm will experience, especially sort of ghost hunters, etc., and people, mediums, particularly, come across something in a similar vein, where there is transmediumship, where people's faces will be overlaid and will morph and change. It tends not to be just randomly at will like that, though. It tends to be in a really deep meditative state that those kind of things occur. And the other thing is, you know, one thing occurred to me when you said it before, you said the shape-shifting aspect of it is, you know, the spiritual belief that people can channel multiple ancestors and multiple beings. Shape-shifting is so fascinating because it kind of goes one step beyond both of those things into taking on a form of an animal is kind of really out there, isn't it? You know, it's quite a strange thing. Did you ever see her afterwards? Did you have any relationship with her afterwards?
No, I only ever saw her once after that, and it was only really in passing. And we said hello, and we just went our separate ways. You know, but no, I didn't really see her after that.
And did you did you take up practice? Did you take up sort of herbalism and healing as part of your practice from there?
I didn't. It's for years after that, I wasn't sure what I was supposed to do with that information, you know, and I kind of forgot. Well, I didn't forget about it, but I kind of forgot where it could have led me, you know. And then it was in 2009. I mean, I'd always had an interest in, you know, the spiritual side of things, but if you don't know what you're looking for, you don't know where to start, you know. And I thought to myself, who can I talk to about shapeshifters? Because as soon as I do, they'll just tell me to go and watch American Werewolf in London, or you know, there's no one around that can actually talk to me about these things, because the people who know about these things won't sit and talk to you about it. You know, it's a guarded knowledge. And then I was 2009. I was living in South Wales for a little while. I walked into a bookshop, and I found a book by a guy called Nick Redfern, who is a writer for such things as 14 Times and all that sort of stuff. And he had written a book called Three Men Seeking Monsters. And it was an account of he and his two friends who'd spent the best part of a year in a motorhome, traveling from one place to the other in the UK, having found some information about a strange occurrence. They went to check that out, and that occurrence led them onto another and onto another and onto another. And it was the fact that this book was written so matter-of-factly. And then I looked into him a little bit more, and I found out that he'd been investigating the paranormal, and he'd written so many books on the subject. And it kind of gave me an in. You know, this is where you start looking. Well, now you've read this book, look at that. And, you know, and of course, before the internet, you couldn't find this information, you know, and of course it's, even though it is on the internet, you can't take it all at gospel, but, you know, it's, once you've got the information there in front of you, it leads you to books that, you know, you would never have even known about. I mean, I've got my book collection up there now. I've got books from a long time ago, books that have been really, really hard to track down. You know, that until I saw the name flashed up on the internet, I would never have known it existed. You know, so it has led me to investigate things a little bit more. You know, but I'm interested in where these things began. You know, going back through mythology and folklore and trying to dissect what's just anecdotal evidence and what's actually been investigated and things like that, you know. I do find it very interesting.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm a big advocator of people going out and investigating more than just usual ghosts and spirits, you know, and using some of, because we seem to be in an age where we're quite focused in the paranormal world of just that, you know, the spirits of the dead, even going into realms of demonic, but we have these rafts of knowledge in the way to investigate and equipment. You know, I know people with thousands of pounds worth of equipment, and to shift that investigative style and all this knowledge and equipment over into other realms is something that I am seriously passionate about, sort of making those shifts to see if they work, to see if the same sort of techniques and technologies work in other realms, you know, and things that are outside of our peripheral kind of senses and whatnot. So that's definitely a book I'm going to have to. Was it Nick Redfern?
Nick Redfern, Three
Yeah,
Men Seeking Monsters. Yeah,
definitely got to buy that one. Yeah, the name rang a bell. I'm a big 14 times lover as well. It's definitely shaped who I am over the years. So I will definitely look that book up.
He's saying that about using the high tech, you know, gadgets and gizmos to look into this stuff. Have you read anything about Skinwalker Ranch?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought you had. That's been on my radar for a long time, and I've been trying to soak up as much about that as I possibly can. That's some really interesting stuff.
That's just seems to me like one huge raft of portals going off in that place. There is just every bit of activity paranormal wise, you know, UFOs, ancient Native American folklore going off, hauntings, you know, nature spirits. It's like everything in one shebang. It is a bit of a, I'd say a dream, but it should be a nightmare, shouldn't it? A nightmare scenario to go somewhere like that. But the thing is, for me, with the Skinwalker Ranch, it begs the question, and I know we're going outside the realms here, but it begs the question: is it one thing that invites those other things into that, or is it something simply to do with earth energy that kind of, you know, it draws, you know, these energies to it, or is it, you know, there was a haunting first, and then that kind of energy attracted UFO, or was it Skinwalker, or, you know, that really fascinates me when you get. Because that's the other thing, you know, the amount of people that I talk to, and the more people that I talk to who say, I've had apparitional encounters, I have had demonic encounters. And then when you start digging, they're a bit more fuzzy about wanting to talk about it, but they'll say, I think I've seen a UFO as well. You know, so people, when they have one phenomena, tend to have a whole plethora of phenomena, but they find it difficult to talk about anything other than sort of, you know, seeing the spirit of somebody who's died or having what they deem as a demonic encounter. That's okay, you know, that seems fairly okay. You know, you say you've seen a little green alien and people start going, okie dokie. And like you with the shapeshifter, you say, I've seen somebody shapeshifting. You know, I can imagine people's reaction to that of, really? You know, are you for real? You know, it's that kind of thing.
This is it. I don't tell. I say I don't tell many people. I've just told your whole audience.
I know.
Yeah, I usually have to pick the people that I tell that to. But it's, I can understand it. I mean, there's a lot of people out there who see because they want to believe. And then there's a lot of people who want to see because they believe. And I can understand how people would find it strange to believe that something like that could happen. But at the same time, I found that the people who would look at you with a, you know, look at you sideways would also not believe the evidence if it was put in front of them.
Yeah.
If you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Because some people can be, it's very good to be analytical of the things that come your way, but yeah, people can be very close-minded at times as well.
Definitely.
Even when the evidence is laid out in front of them.
And I
you know.
think a lot of the time that can be born out of fear, or it can be born
Yeah,
out, of thinking, am I going mad? Did I really see it? The human brain has a brilliant way of not only false memories, but also covering up memories. So people who have had, certain encounters as children, that may never ever resurrect in their mind at any later date, because the brain just shuts it off and says, it wasn't really, didn't happen, just move on with your life, kind of thing. So before we came on and started recording, I said to you about I'm sure you've had more than one encounter, and you, like many of my guests, had said, yes, I've had more than one encounter. And I did ask you this before, so I'm not sort of putting James on the spot or anything. James, I'd love to have you back and talk about how that particular incident then kind of rolled on and opened your world into other things that occurred to you. But for now, please go and check out James's work. His work is incredibly otherworldly, and I think you will all find it absolutely fascinating, his work. And James, just before you go, I want to say you're in very safe hands with what you say on my channel. People who comment and people who message me are genuinely grateful that people like yourself are sitting down and saying these things. And obviously, I'm not in a mental institute, you're not in a mental institute, we're everyday people just saying, weird exists, and it's exciting and it's curious and it's life-changing, it's and people appreciate that. People appreciate when they've had weird experiences, saying, I'm not the only one. I'm not the only crackpot in the cauldron, basically. So thank you so much for joining me. And I'm hoping to sit down with you real soon and catch up again on some more of your tales. So thank you, James.
Excellent. Thank you.